Good evening and welcome to the CCLCS Post-Budget Forum. Analysis continues, a focus on the impact of the budget on the creative sector, hosted by the Elmer Francois Institute for Research and Debate, Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. My name is Tarumi, and I will be moderating this session on behalf of the Elmer Francois Institute for Research and Debate. We have a real good lineup for you tonight. So I encourage you, our viewers, to ask the panel as many questions throughout this session. You can do so by typing your questions in the YouTube chat box just at the side of your screen, or email us at elmerfrancoisinstitute@cclcs.edu.tt. I'll say it again because it's a mouthful. Elmer Francois Institute at cclcs.edu.tt. If your question is for a particular panel member, please specify which member, or it can be a general question that we throw to the panel. And your questions will be answered once time permits. So let's get in the mix. Our first presenter, Lamar Pollard, Production Manager, Academy for the Performing Arts. Lamar Pollard is a creative sector professional with 17 years of experience across a range of subsectors, including music production, live music performance, theater, and the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival. He holds an MA in Public Policy and Public Management from the University of York and an MA in Carnival Studies from UTT. Lamar's ongoing doctoral research focuses on the relationship between policy implementation and the governance network for the Carnival. He is currently the production manager at the Academy for the Performing Arts, where he lectures on event and festival management related courses. Good evening and welcome, Lamar.
Thank you for me. Thank you so much. Okay, so let me share this PowerPoint. All right, guys. So firstly, I just want to preface the discussion with two caveats. First is, one, I'm not an economist, but I'll refer to economic or econometric data and concepts, and also that I have no graphs or pretty pictures, as some people tend to like to see with PowerPoint. So just to jump right in, before we dive into the the discussion on the creative industries, I think it's and the budget. Sorry. I think it's important that we just kind of look at the global context and some other contexts to situate the discussion. Well, firstly, as we know, majority of the countries of the world have been projected by the IMF, World Bank, and other economic centers to be plunged into recession. One of the main points is that countries like Japan, the United States, and Western Europe, the broader Western Europe, their economies are expected to contract by 7%. As we also know, global oil prices have shut down by close to 50%. And internationally in the US, the unemployment insurance claims have increased by 800%. And this data and information is important, and we'll discuss that a bit further in the presentation. As it pertains to regional and the local economic context, the Latin America and Caribbean, which are is the grouping that we fall within, is expected to see a contraction of GDP of 5.2%. Trinidad, however, interestingly, the IMF projected that we should expect a 4.5% contraction of the economy, even though some local economists have expected close to twice that percentage as it pertains to contraction of our economy. Brent crude, natural gas, Brent crude, has hovered around $40 US per barrel since June, and natural gas, which is our real earner, is just close to $3 as it pertains to 1 million BTUs per unit, British thermal units, 1 million British thermal units. Folks have referred to the current situation as a perfect storm of low prices to our energy commodities. Again, this is integral information as it pertains to contextualizing the budget because our economy is based on predominantly on energy commodities. As it pertains to tourism, looking at the region, we are ranked at 100 on the tourism dependency index. All right. Moving on to the creative industries, again, before we tackle the budget, the current position, by my estimation, is that we have 5 things that we need to look at. Firstly, the key subsectors. So as it pertains to creative industries, there's something very important that we need to do because as it pertains to the term creative industries, there's no agreed upon definition. So academically and internationally, Hesmondal, who wrote the book Cultural Industries in 2002, he identified the cultural industries as architecture, advertising, arts and crafts, design, fashion, motion pictures, television, music, the fine and the performing arts, intellectual property / publishing, research and development, software development, toys, games, radio, and video games. In essence, if you really look at all the areas he's spoken about, each of these areas are protected by intellectual property rights. So intellectual property is a key component of understanding what the creative industries are. However, in Trinidad, the creative industries, at least if we look at the statutorial definition of creative industries, we're talking about music, film, and fashion under creative TT. And creative TT is an arm of or the statutory, the line ministry is the Ministry of Trade and Industry, which I think is still headed by the Honorable Ms. Paula Gopiswu. However, the performing arts and some of the other sectors I mentioned fall under the cultural sector or the cultural industries. And this falls under the Ministry of Culture or the ministry responsible for culture, specifically the Division of Culture. That's the department that kind of handles cultural issues and cultural industrial issues. And it's important that we understand this moving forward because I think that, again, a broad brush is painted over the whole idea of creative industries, where we speak about creative industries very broadly, and the sector, the overall industrial sector is very diverse. And diverse meaning that we have a number of large corporate citizens, sole traders, and self-employed persons. And I'm saying I'm making a distinction between sole trader and self-employed because of the informality of our sector, which I'll use as a segue into my second point. The sectors within the overall, the overarching creative industries are largely informal. So we have a lot of people who don't have registered businesses, they aren't part of any type of collective management agency or intellectual property agency, or they don't have these type of things in place. And this is one of the major issues that we face. The third point that I think is worthy of discussing is the deficiency in the relevant meta skills. As it pertains to meta skills, we are speaking about the skills necessary for innovation, which is one of the things that every industry needs to look at, whether it's creative sector, agriculture, education, etc. And the meta skills, as identified by academics within the innovation academia, have identified feeling, seeing, dreaming, making, and learning as the meta skills. You would see that I italicize dreaming and making because we are stars at dreaming. We love to dream and we could make something. However, feeling, which in this instance refers to intuition about the market, seeing, which is refers to the research components and actually concretizing or putting some kind of empirical foundation to your feelings, and learning, whether it's policy learning or otherwise, these are the areas that, from my experience, that the creative industries, the majority of the informal sector is, deficient in. We are also deficient in the necessary skills for long-term survival, which are technological, financial, and communication skills. And just to expound a bit, as it pertains to technological, as a staff, as a lecturer at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, I've seen the students who at my campus, at the university at which I teach, which is the Academy for the Performing Arts, have gravitated towards a move to full online, right? Online learning. However, certain colleagues that I have in the creative sector have not been able to make the transition as not brusquely, but as efficiently and as quickly as they need to. As it pertains to financial skills, I think this one doesn't need much explanation. I'll just cite two examples, which I know I will be attacked for, but I'll still say them. I feel as though the most recent situations with Errol Fabian and Gael, and even more recently, Blacks and Blacks' health situation identify a serious deficiency as it pertains to financial literacy and understanding how to manage your resources in such a way that you kind of cater for long-term necessary costs. Many times we don't think about insurance and what's necessary as it pertains to, seeing about your, whether it's final arrangements or your health in the twilight of your years. I'm not saying that Blacks was not, or Errol, Mr. Fabian, weren't prudent as it pertains to overseeing their specific financial circumstances. However, if we look historically at the situation with most artists, and I'm going back to a story that I heard from Aki de Leon, Royland's son, about Lord Executor, who died in poverty in Gonzales. He was blind and died in poverty, and Royland had to bury him. And this is a recurring issue that we have seen in the creative, certain subsectors within the creative industries. Lastly, I think communication is one of the major skills that we lack. And again, I'm painting a broad brush, even though I said that we shouldn't initially on the creative industries, because again, in my experience, as it pertains to music, the performing arts, theater, etc., we have a communication issue. And the communication issue I'm speaking about is intra-sectorally and intra-governmentally, where we have issues where a lot of practitioners and stakeholders have issues drafting proposals, communicating formally, etc., even communicating issues of design. We don't have skills in that area, and these affect the success of design. The last point is, as it pertains to the current position that the creative industries is insularity. My research focus for the last 6 years has been on the importance of networks and networking. And I'm not speaking about networks here in IT, information technology, computer, or even in a social sense, like social networking. I'm speaking about governance network, which is the network of public, private, and non-governmental organizations responsible for specific policy areas. And there's a huge void as it pertains to the policy foundation for collaborative work, as it pertains to the various sectors that support the creative industries, as well as the various government organizations that support the creative industries. And also, more importantly, even within the creative industries, there's a seeming lack of inter-industrial collaboration. Yes, collaboration exists because musicians work with masqueraders and band leaders, panists work with both, even graphic artists, architects, etc., have found themselves in industries outside of their core industry. However, these are the exceptions rather than the rule. The rule is more insularity, siloing, where people keep to themselves and try to figure out their problems among their peers. So important themes for the budget. Again, this list is by no means exhaustive. It's just for the purpose of discussion. For me, one of the important things was the education and training allocation of it was 8 billion. It was just under 8 billion. This is very important for the creative sector because obviously, again, education and training is something that the creative sector provides and also benefits from, meaning that the creative sector stakeholders or creative industry stakeholders need to further their education and training in specific areas. So it's I think it's beneficial for the sector to see such a sizable allocation, even though we know the allocation relates to specific areas within education and training. Most notably, the technological platforming of education and training. The next is agriculture, which is I think was the penultimate lowest budget allocation of 1.2. I think the lowest was 1 million, and I can't remember who it was, but agriculture was 1.2 million. And why it's important for us to note what agriculture received is because of the importance of food security and the need to ensure that we are able to produce enough food for the population. And it's important for the creative industries to kind of understand that to really look at, again, largest to smallest, what is most important and what is at least least important within the high rollers of allocation. And agriculture, as I said, was the second to last largest allocation of 1.2 billion. And again, I think we could all appreciate how important agriculture is as a sector. Another important theme is the supposed proposal to digitally transform the education sector. As low as school, the minister said, all the way up to tertiary education. And this, again, plays a vital role in the creative sector because of how heavily involved the creative sector will be in anything with the word digital in it. When we hear the word digital and transformation, we're thinking about creative sector related industries and the role they're going to play in transforming the sector, as well as the fact that the creative sector itself needs to benefit from this type of digital transformation. So there's an opportunity for what you call path dependency, where one policy kind of creates a path that other sectors or industries or ministry portfolios can benefit from. Next is, again, well, the creative and cultural industries, salary relief and income support grants. Obviously, as I tell my students and my friends, any dust is good dust, to quote Dust Boss. Once you're getting dust, and we're good. And the thing about it is that that was the only lip service really paid to the creative and cultural industries, specifically. Again, the salary relief and income support grant. Lastly, very relevant is the fact that Carnival received $36 million for operational costs from the NCC. So this means the special interest groups, or what I've interpreted from looking at the PSIP allocations, is that the special interest groups aren't going to receive any money. What does this mean? The special interest groups represent the Pan, the Mass, and the Calypso communities, the music of Carnival. They represent those communities, and these institutions have historically received subventions from the government to conduct the operations. And I think we have reached to the point where they have received a wake-up call that things can happen where they get no money and they need to figure it out again. But this is just my interpretation. This may in fact change. So implications of the budget on the creative industries. First is I anticipate that there will be a suspension or drastic reduction in public sector projects. Again, if we look at both the cultural industries, which fall under the purview of the Ministry of Tourism and Culture, but again, historically under any ministry responsible for culture. And if we look at creative industries under creative TT, music, film, fashion, which falls under trade and industry, I anticipate that the number of projects and the scale of the projects will be drastically reduced. I'll go a bit further to say that we're going to end up in a situation where the politically aligned creative sector and cultural industry stakeholders are going to benefit more heavily. However, the multitudes are going to suffer as it pertains to these projects. The second point is there's going to be a reduction in the quality of national products, whether it's festivals, the knowledge-based products, etc. I say this because historically, as early as 1956, when Eric Williams ascended as the first chief minister, the festivals and our cultural products were subsidized. Excuse me, and this evolved and snowballed over the years, where the government became the major patron of specific uh, units or subsectors within the creative industries. And if the government is the major investor or major financier or patron, and they have less money, it stands to reason that they may try to, one, spread the butter too thin, or the butter will end up in one place where one thing looks good, but that's unlikely. You'll most likely spread the resources, the finite resources, unlimited resources very thinly, and this will affect the quality of products. So again, even if we talking about Carnival 2021, which the PM has communicated to the public is off, it's likely that even if something does happen, the resources allocated to it will be very limited, and it may affect the quality of the actual festival or the actual virtual product or whatever it is. And this will again obtain for subsequent and other products within the catalog of products that the government's the catalog of cultural and creative sector products that the government patronizes or finances. The third point is that there's going to be a severe contraction to specific subsectors in the creative industries. As I indicated earlier, the creative industries are very broad. And again, we like to say things like, oh, let's have a discussion about the creative industries. But some industries are in a better position than others because of, one, the size of the size of that specific sector, as well as the development of that specific sector. So if we're going along the lines of identifying advertising as a sector, yes, advertising has contracted, but the advertising agencies have resources that will allow the actual core companies to survive. Somebody who running a studio in Caroni, who catering for for Trinidad music, he may not survive. Or as somebody who ran a studio for close to 10 years, I could tell you that situations like this, when we had the SOE, it was real pain. I had to go buy money to eat lunch. When I was living on my own, I used to have to travel up to Senegal to get lunch, and I anticipate that it will be more severe for the majority of creative industries, specifically those that are largely informal. And lastly, and I think this one might Rubadiri, I suspect, may speak more about this or have something to say at the very least about this, is that there's the potential loss of cultural heritage is very real. Only because what we refer to as cultural heritage, whether it's tangible cultural heritage like mass and certain of the certain other products and artifacts that we have produced for Carnival, or any of the other indigenous festivals, whether it's First Peoples or otherwise, and the intangible cultural heritage, such as, again, the oratorical art forms that are present in the Carnival. These heritage products, or heritage elements rather, I rather call it elements rather than products. The heritage elements have historically been received subventions to ensure their preservation. With reduced money, there's, again, for the last 10 years, we have been slowly losing a lot of our cultural heritage via the death of some of the practitioners and the leaders or pioneers of these or the persons who carrying on these different art forms or cultural heritage elements. So it's quite it's very likely that we will experience some loss, because one point I want to note for everybody, just so that we could put it in context, the Carnival Institute of Trinidad and Tobago, which was enacted by a cabinet note, not an act of parliament, but a cabinet note, as its own institution within the network of Carnival institutions, has now been subsumed into the regional carnival, where they get in a few cubicles at the savannah. And this is information that came to me today. And this is no fault of the NCCs or the governments. It's more issue of, again, historical misunderstandings of culture and the value of research and whatnot. But we'll touch on how we solve that in the next slide. So in my last slide, let me just make sure. Oh, sorry. So yes, in the last slide, I just want to touch on what I believe are the next steps. So the first, the most integral step is to learn from our mistakes. We have 3 major mistakes we have made since, again, 1956. I'll use 56 self-governance, and then, or if you want to use even independence, 1962 as the genesis, the beginning of the process. The first was policy creation without network. Policy requires stakeholders to be involved, and not in a patronizing way, not to say like, hey, well, come and sit down with us and tell us what you think. The actual steps of policy creation need to involve the network from agenda formulation to implementation, right? And agenda formulation is deciding what ends up on the policy agenda. And you could only figure out what makes sense if you have the network that the key stakeholders agree need to be part of the network. So using Carnival as an example, Pan, Mass, and Calypso became the core parts of the NCC Act, of the policy document that represents Carnival. However, as early as 2003, 2004, there was conflict within the network because there were other groups who felt they needed to be represented, whether it was fetting, whether it's partying, whether it's stick fighting, or the whole cornucopia of Carnival arts. The second is policy theory. Again, I'm using the NCC Act as an example. The underlying theory that determines or suggests causality between what we have and where we want to go. The underlying the whole idea of causality, as built into theory, is integral for figuring out policy direction. You can't know what the policy that you need to create is if you don't understand the underlying theory of all these stakeholders involved in that specific sector. Again, so using Carnival, we might say, well, Pan is the steel pan as well. We invent that, is the greatest upcycling project of the 20th century. So we have to involve Pan. And then Mass now is an expression of movement and color and art and whatnot. And then again, Calypso is the voice of the people and the festival and whatnot. And we deem these things to be important, and then nationalize the festival, and that snowballed and created its own issues. The last is
looking... 2 minutes left. 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes again. 2 minutes. No problem. And the last point is state-driven institutionalization. I've seen calls for people, let's form an arts council. We need an arts council. We need a council to decide how to spend the money and what happens with the projects and whatnot. And if we're talking about a council that relies on subvention from the government or government funding, or even funding from large corporate donors, we're going to repeat mistakes that we have already seen the product of that, of this type of state-driven institutionalization as it pertains to establishing specific areas within the creative sector. The next point is formalization of the sector. As we know, the sector is largely informal. A lot of self-employed people who don't pay taxes, who have no record of the work they have done, etc. And this makes it difficult for policy to be rolled out. We also deprive, the sector also deprives itself of the opportunity to engage the government and other large stakeholders within the economy by not having a formal sector. Nobody's going to take us seriously, right? And I think this is one of the points that the government mentioned as it pertains to creative industries. The third point is network development, unionization, cooperative society, guilds, members organizations. I know we have several of them, but we don't have an integrated network of organizations that fall under the banner of creative industries or cultural industries, as it were. We do have some, so again, the Carnival, just citing the Carnival, because of government involvement and the nationalization of specific cultural manifestations that represent Trinidad Carnival, they have benefited from the policy umbrella that the NCC Act has created, where they have a seat at the table and they are afforded certain rights. This is the first time, I think, from my knowledge, since 1997, that the special interest groups have not directly received their own money to run their affairs because of the current again pandemic and the budget issues. So network development is key. The fourth point is establishment of industrial regulations, codes of conduct, safety, benefits, etc. This is critical. I just want to point out a situation that a lot of our technical theater practitioners and a lot of our technical folks, they work inhumane hours during peak festival periods during the year, and they have no benefits to receive, and they don't even have codes of conduct, codes of safety that kind of protect them from, for example, going up on a scaffolding to rig the North Park or North Stand, sitting on a beam without a helmet, or without a harness, and again, this is key to being taken seriously as an industry. Fifth, policy integration into the national developmental plans, and also insulating it from administration change. There's something called punctuated equilibrium, where whenever a new administration comes in, they kind of reset the whole. It's like we in this time warp where every 5 years we starting over. It's like watching this movie. I forget the name of the movie with Jake Gyllenhaal, where he just in the psyche in this loop. We in this policy loop where we repeating some of the same mistakes, or we starting a whole fresh batch of policy ideas every 5 years, and we need to kind of integrate whatever policy that we establish for the creative sector into the national agenda, as well as we need reciprocation in the other sectoral and governmental policies and frameworks that allow inclusion of what we're doing in their work. So just to use one example, for Carnival, there's always not a conflict, but there's always an issue working with certain other arms of government because they are not involved in the NCC's planning. So the police, the traffic branch will find out what's going on a few days before, the week before, or a few weeks before, about what's happening for parade of the bands, and there's an issue. The penultimate next step is our education drive. Financial literacy, marketing, intellectual property, etc. Just knowledge in these areas. And lastly, I think identification of new markets and audiences is key, especially if we look at the current circumstances of our core markets, which are the United States, the UK, and Japan, which are also referred to as advanced economies. Those are some of our core markets, at least for the Carnival products. And we need to identify some other alternate markets that have larger populations and larger audiences, whether it's China, India, etc., or some of the other EMD, emerging markets and developing economies. I just want to point out, sorry, just to wrap up to Romy, that I did not touch on any specific policy directive, like do this or do that, because I think that's, as my first point states, policy creation without a network, and again, without theory or even without state-driven institutionalization, just leads us down a path of making the same mistakes that we've been making. So, thanks.
Thank you, Lamar, for that very informative presentation. You started off with a global context of IMF projections globally, and then you zoned in on the Trinidad and Tobago economy. You looked at points within the creative industry, defining how we define the creative industry, touching on the point that it is an informal sector, and the deficiencies of meta skills and long-term skills necessary for survival in the industry. Then you looked at important themes that were mentioned in the budget as it relates to creative and cultural industries, education, training, technology, and the implications of budget on creative industries. And you wrapped it up nicely with the next steps. What have we learned? What are the best practices? What mistakes not to repeat right? Also, other next steps such as sector formalization and industry regulations, all that very necessary to take us to the next step. Thank you, Lamar. And yeah, we have questions coming in fast and furious, but I want to go over to Rubaderi, our next presenter. Rubaderi is a multimedia artist from Trinidad and Tobago, working in 8 mediums: painting, theater, music, film, and TV, carnival arts, writing, publishing, lecturing and curating, designing and photography, and is a cultural activist. He is also the founder of the Artist Coalition of Trinidad and Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago's primary artist representative body, and the Wirebend Folklore Theatre, which combines traditional artisanry with interactive animation to depict ancestral. He's the author of Meditation on the Traditions, a photo essay on Trinidad's Carnival traditional masquerade, and publisher of Generation Lion magazine, the largest glossy magazine in the Caribbean. Passion Fruit, an anthology of his paper columns from the country's 2 largest dailies, to be published later this year. His books Anansi and the 10 Dragons and Anansi and the Book of Night are the first and second parts of a 7-part series depicting adventures of Anansi's grandmother as a young spider. This series is part of a larger universe of books entitled Myths for a New Time. Let's go, Rubaderi.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Trinidad and Tobago. Hi, sector people. All right, so this is my theme. The theme is maroonage, right? Maroonage, maroons, escaped slaves, abandoned the plantation. All right, basically saying the backdrop to the budget, Lamar went into some of this. We have a global economic shutdown because of COVID, social distancing is the norm. Inside of that, we have the rise of the virtual economy and the retail economy meltdown. So you have actually what's happening is a transition in terms of types of businesses going on at the moment. Locally, we have a local performing arts Armageddon happening. A lot of the sector are performance-based artists, of course, with social distancing. There's no local performing arts happening, dance, theater, festivals, those kinds of things. So there's a serious, people haven't been done stuff in 6 to 8 months. There's no pay. There's the next 6 to 8 months that they're looking at that coming. There's a retail Armageddon also happening in the retail sector, retail-based stuff. There's a whole set of retail-based artists in the craft sector and other sectors and those things. The fine arts sector, those things, they are also going through serious pain in terms of the retail Armageddon. We're going to be going into a Christmas retail Armageddon. There are a lot of retail businesses that have closed down. Many more just holding on for Christmas to see if they can buy themselves some time into the new year until a vaccine comes along. Christmas is not going to happen. And we are going to witness a retail Armageddon of businesses in the new year. And linked to that, we also have a carnival and festival Armageddon also happening because of Trinidad is a festival nation. We run through a series of festivals of which the creatives are some of the most important people inside those festivals. And we have the biggest one of all, Carnival, coming up. And as the Prime Minister said, there's no physical carnival coming up, and that's going to be a serious thing. I'll talk about the details of that a little later. In the budget, a lot of the budget is concentrated on moving Trinidad and Tobago into the virtual age and into digital economies. Now, the thing is that that may be an issue because the first digital age was lasted from 1980 to 2000s. Trinidad had zero to minimal adoption inside of that in terms of especially our public sector and those kinds of things. We have public sectors that are still analog and those things. I mean, so that past large parts of Trinidad straight as producers. As consumers, people, of course, have been getting digital products and those kinds of things. But as producers, even from private and public sector, but especially public sector, that hasn't happened. The second digital age, which lasted from 2000 to 2020, was the creative industry revolution and renaissance. That was the period in which the creative industries rose from an orphan economy globally to the second largest industry on planet Earth, earning $2.2 trillion annually. That's 2014 UNESCO figures. And in that period, most countries, developed and developing countries that wanted to participate and did stuff, they did so by engaging and creating a facilitative and enabling environment. That enabling environment existed in a lot of developed countries since the 1920s, and they were ramped up in 4 movements throughout the last century. Trinidad and Tobago failed to engage that creative facilitative environment. At the same time, we were experiencing the death of our golden age generation that contained a lot of the IP of a lot of our traditional crafts and a lot of our innovations and those kinds of things. So at the same time that the rest of the planet was going through a creative revolution and renaissance, earning $2.2 trillion, transforming economies and communities using the creative industry and that kind of stuff, Trinidad's creative industries were collapsing in terms of audience reach globally, in terms of traditional IP retention, in terms of networking and a whole set of other things. There were, of course, there's some unevenness inside of that, but I would say out of the 27, let's say 27 things that we do, there was active collapse in more than 20 of them. And now with COVID, we are moving into the third digital age that starts in 2020. You know, you'd notice most of those are 20-year cycles. 20 years is a generational cycle. So we may be moving into a generational cycle from 2020 to 2040 with this new cycle, which is post-COVID virtualization of all factors of production. And government is now seeking to engage like the first age of adoption of digital platforming as a country, and to try to reach to the third age. But you can't jump to the third age without engaging the first 2. And that second age, to be able to engage that second age, you have to create the enabling environment for the creative industries. And those are a finite set of legislation, policy, institutions and enablers and fiscal enablers and that kind of stuff that liberated the dreamers, who were the people who were the early adapters of digital technology, and that created the ecosystem that enabled the creation of the service industry that now the world is entering into. And so the budget does not engage that, and that is a serious issue. So there might have to be some backwards engineering if the government wants to be able to access the digital economies that they want to. They're going to have to empower the creative economies, who are the arrowhead of the digital and virtual economy. Now, there were some victories inside of the this year's budget. And these victories were things that were fought for by us activists and stakeholders over the course of the last 20 years. And finally, some of those things are bearing fruit. One of them is the foregrounding of local content. Well, I'm saying quotas with an inverted, with a question mark, because we don't know that it's going to be legislative. What they said that government is going to go to the local stations and create local content things with them. We don't know if that would be just incentive-based or if it's going to be legislative. There is no broadcast industry on planet Earth outside of America that exists without local content quotas. I'm going to say that again. Incentives have been tried. All kinds of other industrial incubation has been tried across planet Earth. There are no successful broadcast industries without local content quotas. The whole of the EU, massive parts of Africa, Latin America, South Korea, all the vibrant, the Australia, all the vibrant in Asia economies that have broadcast industries, film, TV, music industries have local content quotas. and it's legislated. There's the cultural policy document, which has been tabled in Parliament. And the importance of the cultural policy document, not that we have particular faith, because we don't know what exactly is inside the document, even though there was consultation, is that cultural policy, to get a lot of international monies at UNESCO level and other levels and stuff, you had to have a national cultural policy document. There were literally hundreds of millions of dollars at one point in time. I don't know if that money is available anymore, unless you had a national cultural policy. And the importance of having a national cultural policy means that finally the country might have access to some of the international agency monies that have been available. We'll see. And the main idea that we have a cultural policy which enshrines all the protocols of the working of all the institutions within and programs within the cultural sector, means that rather than vice-versa, which is how things normally run with government, we actually now have a document that could be prosecuted and interrogated, and we can battle over in terms of changing things and getting things down hard and fast. The handicraft sector policy is also important because the craft sector is a very, very, very bedrock sector for the creative industries. It's normally something that is thrown to the side and forgotten. It's a place where a lot of working class people work, and where working class craft industries and cottage industries normally rise to the level of industrial sector. So what we always say is that the entire Italian fashion industry were Italian tailors who were facilitated by government policy and private sector into becoming billion-dollar international fashion brands. But they're just tailors. And we have to treat our artisans and handicraft sector in that same way and facilitate them in that same way, so that there would be the ambassadorial ones that will leave that sector and move on to industrial levels. An important victory is also the creation of the Ministry of Digitization, which means that there is a specific ministry that is going to go ahead in terms of dealing with the ramping up of sectoral stuff, whether it be in our sector, in the service industries and those kinds of things. All the impediments which we have faced in terms of getting the virtualization of business, right? At banking level, at tech level, at bandwidth level, and those kinds of things. Hopefully, this ministry is able, with the sector participation, to fast track the adoption of virtual business and stuff, so that working class people are able in 3 to 4 steps to open a business when they have ideas and when they have entrepreneurship on their side, and innovation on their side. So you create plants of a particular type, and you have 40 extra that you always create. You could create a business that gets rid of that surplus in 4 easy steps, and you have a business that sells globally. And so those are the kinds of things that a Ministry of Digitization kinds of removes the impediments and the eases business. There are a whole set of incentives for tech. There are grants available for startups, tax credits to businesses which invest in tech. Tech investment fund and a tech promotions and development company is going to be established. That's important for industry, who we are the ones that, again, in the second age, this was the kind of stuff that was probably needed and that kind of stuff, because we are the ones who are creative adjacent to the tech, and that's where we come in. The resourcing of the animation department, Camille will talk about that. So the animation department over the last 3 years, so 5 to 7 years, has been where a lot of the funding in the sector has gone into resourcing that particular industry in terms of bricks and mortar, in terms of creation of institutional real estate, in terms of equipping with business, with tech, and as well in terms of money and facilitation, in terms of talent and those kinds of things, and the facilitating of the software, in terms of grant funding and those kinds of things to liberate these things on the ground. So that is also a victory that is inside the budget. And there is some funding for heritage and tourism inside the budget. It is very limited towards very, very specific kind of very traditional ideas of heritage and very traditional ideas of the tourism product, but it gives the intersectional and design related people in the sector a window in which to engage both the heritage and tourism sector in terms of ramping up the use and the creation of adaptive use sites, which could become multi-million-dollar earners in communities. Right, so these are the big failures in the budget. Right, so we normally have one of the two lowest subventions in for the budget, right? Normally it's about $300 million. That has been reduced by over 150 million and more. And I'm talking about, as opposed to say national security and education, which used to get around $15 billion and stuff, but it's down now. They get like 7 billion and around 9 billion and those kinds of things. But still, that's the kind of huge kind of gaping hole between what our sector gets and what other things get. And that money also pays salaries, I should also add. Now, the thing is, as I said, the creative industries are the second largest industry on planet Earth. The second largest industry on planet Earth. And that is what we're getting. So I'm going to go down and you're going to see some of that. In this next sentence, you kind of have the kind of disconnect that happens between government in terms of the spend and resourcing of this sector. So this is in the budget document, Film, Fashion, and Music in the Ministry of Trade. This is from one of the 7 budget documents that are released with the budget. In 2020, the sector experienced positive growth of 0.26% to 0.30% of GDP, which translated a contribution of 4.276 million in 2019 and the creation of 1,168 jobs for the citizens. The Ministry of Trade, through its respective agencies, utilized the sum of 4.8 million towards the development of the film, music, and fashion subsectors. Again, the contribution to GDP, 427.6 million, 1,168 jobs. The 3 ambassadorial industrial arms of the sector through the Ministry of Trade, which are receiving support, which are supposed to be the premium spend for that people who are earning that money, is $4.8 million. And to take it further, this year, the entire film industry received a subvention of $1.3 million. That's less than 200,000 US dollars. That is less money than a normal US catering budget on a normal US film will get. That is supposed to fund an entire industry of multiple films, multiple programs, training, all those different kinds of things. Of course, that can't happen. That is madness. So there's also other failures in the budget of the out-of-touchness of government and the sector. So there's something called the National Registry, and the National Registry is the thing that is born out of what we won in the year 2000, the legislation for tax write-offs and tax discounts and rebates for corporate giving for the sector, and that's risen from 3 million to 6 million to 9 million in terms of their gives. And there are massive problems with the implementation of that. Very, very, very few corporate people have made use of this facility. At the core of it is a national registry of artists, which is used as the database that is used to be able for people to leverage that stuff. In our count as the Artist Coalition of Trinidad and Tobago, there are 10,000 artists, people who call themselves artists, who receive a substantial amount of their monies from the creative sector. That national registry registered 27 people last year. And if you check how many people registered out of the 10,000 artists, you would see the small fraction of the sector that is actually registered in the national registry. And so that is a complete failure in terms of the rollout of that registry and what it's supposed to do. And we have consistently gone after them in terms of how it should be done, who should be doing the registering, and all those different things. The other thing is the welfare part of this thing, which is the grants that are rolled out. The second tranche of this is now open, so these figures might have changed. But up until last week, only 350 people out of the 10,000 full-time artists received the $5,000 grant. A lot of people say, well, artists get out of free money and they have so much free money. The figure for the other grant, I think, was 1,165 people, right? So just to give you the wide disparity between the need of people who don't have, who haven't been able to pay rent, mortgage, healthcare, send their children to school, buy laptops, etc., 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 and looking at a year and a half at least with no kind of income. And the thing is, most people think that the sector is made up of Range Rover driving people. Most of the artists are working class. There are 10,000, as I said, most that are in the first set, but there are also 10,000 people in the seasonal and festival arts community, people who appear around that time and they derive part of their annual monies from the participation with the festivals. The festivals, of course, have collapsed under COVID, and there are about a further 15,000 people who are just part-time artists. In all, there are about 35,000 creatives in all. All right, so throughout the budget, there's this phrase, the creative and cultural industries are emerging as a critical engine of growth and development. This is false. The creative industries aren't emerging anything. The creative industries have been the second largest industry on planet Earth for 20 years. Earning $2.2 trillion annually. That is a complete failure of vision of government, because all the things that we told them for us to be able to monetize the sector, the creation of the facilitative environment. So a lot of the things that Bibo talks about that where it seems to be problems with the industry in terms of the artists themselves and building capacity are issues of the lack of the enabling environment in terms of government. If those things were in place, you would find the adaptation of a lot of best practice by artists. But when you create the modes of being of hustle, that is what you get. And that is what the government has done. Between welfare and hustle, that's what they've created at a time when people were earning, where working class people were transforming into billionaires over the last 20 years. You have a whole stuff with working class gangsters and that kind of stuff who are now billionaires in that 20-year period. A lot of working class businesses and stuff that started off as cottage industries are now multi-million dollar industries because of what was enabled by those enabling environments of legislation, policy, and institutions, which we have failed to build and engage, right? So those are some of the failures. These are some of the figures that exist, so we kind of have an idea. This is UK's creative figures. This is 2014 figures. 2.8 million jobs are creative jobs. 1 in every 11 jobs in the UK is a creative industry job. That's 8.8% of the UK job market is creative industries. They earn $84.1 billion pounds per year, sorry, right? So that's 840 billion TT, right, a year. They earn 9.6 million pounds per hour. That's 96 million TT per hour in the creative industries. Their growth rate was 8.9%, almost 9%, 2% more than the national average. There are video game companies bigger than oil and gas companies. That is what government and Caribbean leaders, and especially Trinidad and Tobago leaders, have not understood in the last 20 years, that there are video game companies bigger than oil and gas companies, that that the creative economies has been the leverage economy for massive development for the planet in the last year, opening up the service industries. It has been the creative economy, and this is predicated upon that enabling environment. 36.578 billion of that is IT, 13 billion advertising, 10 billion film and TV, 10 billion publishing, 5 billion music and arts, 4 billion architecture, 3 billion fashion and design, and 0.2 billion crafts. We sent in an artist master plan for the government 1 month ago to deal with the post-COVID thing. What we asked for the migration of a minimum of $300 million from national security. Why? They had the second largest subvention. A lot of their stuff is crime prevention and programs and those kinds of things, and policing and militarized stuff. We're saying rather than a military solution for crime crime prevention, give that money, some of that money to us to be able to translate that into creative work for people and converting communities and rehabilitating communities and creating knock-on economies that are able to employ people. What would that extra $300 million have done? It would have employed 25,000 people, put them to work, and it would have created about 1.5 billion in foreign exchange in 1.5 years. And there are ROIs, feasibilities where we showed how those things would happen. The implementation vehicles for that would have been the new Arts Council, which they said that they were going to do, which I did not see in the PSIP, and Creative TT, which would finally get the kind of monies that are necessary to fund the sector. And there were massive capital projects inside there, like the Carnival and Steel Band Museum, the House of Music or Trinidad and Tobago Museum of Music, the, in East Port of Spain, community intersectional projects, heritage-based and design projects inside communities, and the reanimation of Caribbean Song Basin as the kind of lead institution for the music industry in Trinidad and Tobago. Those capital projects would have put literally thousands of people to work, because they're labor intensive, they're construction-based projects. There is no physical tourist industry in the next year and a bit. We can't look for it there. Those projects will take 2 to 3 years to construct, so they'll be perfectly poised to open when the global tourist industry opens back out, and we would have prime destinations. And that's the problem with Trinidad. We do not have destinations. We have events, we have conference infrastructure, but we don't have premium destinations. What is the difference between what we gave and what we got in the budget? We suggested the creation of that kind of building that you see there, the Guggenheim in Bilbao. That's what the Carnival and Steel Band Museum should have looked like. It would have been a premium tourist destination on the planet, built in the savannah and that kind of stuff. Instead, the government gave us that building that you see on the right-hand side, the Museum of San Andreas, to put the Carnival and Steel Band Museum inside. We're taking it, We're taking it and we're working on creating that other building whilst housed in this building. But it's to tell you the difference in vision of how we saw the innovation that was necessary to put people to work in this budget versus what we got. The repercussions, the implications for the kind of budget that we got for this sector, where you have $300 million, which always underfunded the sector, reduced to less than probably $100 million, is going to be catastrophic, right? The emptying out of the NCC from 150 million to 36 million, and no physical carnival is going to have catastrophic repercussions. Where I lived, a young pan man came to my house. He's one of the people who was like a kind of one of the people who the community looked up to. Somebody who not in stupidness and slackness. He came to me telling me, yo, boss, my weed whacker mashup, I haven't played the pan in 8 months. They have no panorama coming up. They have no gigs coming up and that kind of stuff. The boys in the block telling me, yo, stop that stupid pan thing. Let me go and put down our work, right? Put down our crime. You and your granny will eat nice straight through Christmas into Carnival. Don't study it. He come to me and he tell me, I have reached the end of my rope. I have nothing left, a penny less. What to do? That scenario, you could multiply that by about 10,000 right across the nation and stuff and thing with across the nation if you don't have innovation in terms of creative sector, working class people, and those kinds of things and putting them to work. Errol Fabian's potential homelessness and the foreclosure and that kind of stuff, we're going to see those kinds of things multiply across the country and especially in the creative sector. You're also going to see the health crisis that Blacks is experiencing. You're going to see those things multiply. Why? Because you have scenarios like the following. Carnival brings in 55,000 visitors and over $650 million in Forex. I don't know whether they got that $400 and something billion stuff, because if you multiply the 55K visitors and the new spenders in the Carnival economy spend 20,000 and more, the people who are now spending at that time. But even if you multiply that by 15K, see the kind of figures that you're going to get in terms of the amount of money that the carnival brings in. $150 million spent by the state, 600 million moving around in the private economy. That means we are losing $1.5 billion of economic activity with the loss of carnival and tens of thousands of jobs, especially of working class people. We are going to witness madness, suicide, exile, crime, and poverty spirals if we not deal with those things. Mm-hmm. So the artists have a strategy.
This is your 2 minutes
no
left.
Problem. The artists have a strategy. We always had a plan B. Government ignored what we sent to them. Our strategy is maroonage, abandon the plantation, move ahead without government. It means that the entire sector has to move into cooperative mode. Only our talent is going to see us through this next phase. We are bartering talent amongst one another to work on projects which have bigger pictures. The arts is the thing that kept the world sane during this period. Even though performing arts and stuff are suffering, the virtual arts and the virtual medias are booming. Virtual platforms and virtual content is booming. We want to migrate everyone's content online for monetization during this next 3 months. And we want to make use of the victories in the budget and insist on the integrity of the things like local content, cultural policy, and those kinds of things. But mainly we are going after the global. How are we doing this? We are going with 2 event horizons. We are creating the virtual carnival from February 13th to 16th. That's 4 days of product, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. The plan is to use Carnival to launch Trinidad and Tobago's virtual economy, not just for Carnival, but for the entire creative sector, and not just for the creative sector, but the entire business sector. Because the plan is we're going to lose 55,000 visitors, but we can go after 55 million pairs of eyes. And it is an unprecedented opportunity. So this next 3 to 4 months has to be about the ramping up of the architecture and the back end of the creative sector, business sector, and everybody getting in line for this possibility of the virtual carnival. Using our international celebrities, the Nicki Minaj's, the Billy Oceans, the Marian Lara's, to create what could be the best telegenic event on earth for that weekend. And the idea is to launch brand TNT and a multitude of our products into the global marketplace. We have been working on that lobby, and I'm sure that is going to happen. The other event horizon is in July, and we're calling it the July generation. And that is that we're going to work with the entire sector to create a generation of new premium content for international music, TV, film, animation, and gaming online platforms. The model is South Korea. We are creating premium content, monetizable films, HD level content, TV series, children's content, video games, niche music. Every sector is going to get a play, the craft, fashion industries, all those kinds of things, platforming of music, TV, film, animation. Nobody could have predicted South Korea could be conquering global pop 15 years ago. But yet still, Korean pop stars, soap operas, action films, and video games are ruling, especially the 12 to 16 demographic in the West and Asian world. The Scud Missile started off with Gangnam Style, the world's first $1 billion viewed YouTube clip, and that announced South Korea's intention, and then they went after the globe. They used a combination of protectionist and enabling measures, low budget know-how, and use free online media to position the content. And other models that we have are the rise of Burna Boy and Afrobeats as a next model, and the British invasion in the 80s. July generation, this next phase is cooperative based. People have to barter talents. People will get royalties in the eventual product. IP lawyers will be important. We'll be releasing content on a weekly basis from July straight to September into global marketplaces. People will want to know, well, where the hell all this is coming from and who are these Trinidad and Tobago people? We want to win space on premium streaming content provider platforms, HBO's, the Netflix, the Disney Pluses, Hulu's, Amazon's, Apple TVs, and the music ones and the Spotify's and all those things. And it is possible that we have to create streaming channels, branded TT, HD level content to be able to do so. We're going to create a standalone unit of industry specialists whose specialties are position of things in distribution and touring. We have a whole set of people where every single international deal that we've done in the last 20 years have been done by these people. We are corralling them together, and they've agreed that they're going to be a force to be reckoned with to create new pathways into international marketplaces. These are some of the contents. There's a theater to film conversion program where we are using scripts and stuff that have been workshopped at play level by senior practitioners using the Play of the Month model to use that for people to go into lockdown with teams to shoot film and television content. We're doing the same thing for music. Or a lot of the top local producers have identified their studios, and some of its best session musicians had said that they are going to give of their space and real estate and talent to bring in some of the best unrecorded music of all niches, rock, reggae, soca, all the full set of stuff, to get into studios where the best musicians and best producers, best mastering techs and stuff are working on this material and creating this new generation of content for July. The local animation industry is going to create an anthologized animation series like a Netflix Love, Death and Robots, which is going to showcase some of our top diaspora talents who are working with Disney, Warner, and all the other large animation things, and working with the local producers to create stuff, as well as with gaming product and those kinds of things. All of this for July. We're asking government to make Tamana Industrial Estate, where the animation department is, into a creative hub with tech and creative practitioners networked and headquartered there, and do the same for the Shore Park facility in Tobago. We want to do a dance soloist competition online, primary, secondary, tertiary, school and adult level competition, voting locally and internationally, same with a national monologue for theater people, secondary, tertiary, adult level. This will get about 250 practitioners in those things, so 500 people inside of those things employed in something that would be a telegenic event that would thing. So wrapping. Nothing said much on East Port of Spain, which if East Port of Spain collapse further, it doesn't matter what the rest of the country does. If the crime spirals, and the boys take to the streets in the way that happened just before the election, every man jack and every industry shuts down. There's a community recovery committee. The arts have to go to that committee and ensure that the arts are part of the rehabilitation of the community and the creation of the new stuff. And there are two, the House of Music project and the Yoruba Village project are two of the projects inside of there. And we want to use the heritage spend that is in the budget to bring the best architects, designers, and creatives to those projects so that we don't have that kind of ugliness that was going on in Maracas and those kinds of things, where the best kind of design heads are working on tourists and heritage-based projects, the premium ones as well as ones in local communities, to create new entrepreneurial hubs. And finally, the Ministry of Tourism, we want to tell them to partner with the creative sector in the virtualization of tourism and destination content, as well as the Ministry of Education. Partner with us, the creative arts, in the transformation of the curriculum into an online system. Let theater, music, animation, dance, visual arts make the curriculum palatable. We also just won the UNESCO Heritage Music City brand for the country. We need to brand the country like that physically, and we need to create a music heritage walk zone for Port of Spain for that to happen. And that could happen through local government. Right, so thank you. That's the big picture of all those things, and that is what needs to be done. Those are the failures of the budget, some of the successes, and that's what needs to happen in moving forward. Thank you very much, and I await your questions going forward.
Much, Derry. A lot to think about. You started off within the COVID context, us existing during these COVID times with a virtual and a digital economy. You mentioned us being in Armageddon stages as it relates to arts, retail, carnival, and festival Armageddon. You moved on to a digital age timeline, and where Trinidad and Tobago falls within each phase. It's not all ho-hum. You mentioned some victories coming out of the budget in terms of local content quotas, policy formation, funding, and incentives. However, every yin has its yang, and there were some failures coming out of the budget. For example, a drop in the budget for the sector, not only in terms of dollars and cents, but failures in terms of connecting with the creatives. And Lamar also touched on that, with no collaboration, no connection, absolute disconnect on a governmental, public, and private level. You use the UK as an example and how they allocate their resources for the creative sector. You talk about submission of the artist master plan and also the repercussions if things are not implemented. For example, crime, how livelihoods of our local icons are affected, their health, and just things spiraling out of control. The artist strategy, you also mentioned about having a vision. We don't have a vision, where we going? We could perish easily. How we can maximize from your two events, Virtual Carnival 2021 and the July Generation. And also looking, in addition to the UK model, you had a South Korean model and how they maximize and how they have taken off. They came out of nowhere. So thank you, Rubaderi, for all those points. I want to take it now to Ms. Camille. Camille, you with us? Camille Salvon Abrams, consultant in digital and transmedia and creative director of Anime Caribe Animation Festival. Camille is the program coordinator for animation studies at the University of Trinidad and Tobago and is the founding director of the NGO Anime Caribe Animation Festival, which is celebrating its 19th year. She currently runs an NGO in collaboration with CARICOM called the Shift Project, which is an intervention program using digital technology to bring at-risk teens into the 21st century. In partnership with the Inter-American Development Bank, she is currently developing a state-of-the-art animation game outsourcing studio at the University of Trinidad and Tobago's flagship campus. She recently served as the chairman of Film TT under the Ministry of Trade and Industry, Government of Trinidad and Tobago. Together with her business partner, Jason Lindsay, they created the Trinidad-based Caribbean outsourcing animation studio called Full Circle Animation Studio. Camille's awards include the Royal Television Society Student Award in 2000, the Caribbean Tales Innovation in Animation in the Caribbean Award, Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival Pioneer in Film Award in 2014, and shortlisted for the Commonwealth Foundation Award for Women in Business. Over the years, Camille has built up a critical mass of international and regional network of professionals in the industry, ranging from Disney, Pixar, EA Games, Toon Boom, and Cartoon Network. Take it away, Camille.
Hi, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for giving all of that information. I don't have to jump into that because it's, obviously it's relevant. But what I want to do is I would like to share some data with you all before I present it and how that came about. I was asked by CARICOM to present the effects of COVID on the creative industry, but in particular to the visual music animation film. All right, so what I did was tweak that document to present today. So I wanted to give it context. One of the challenges we have as a sector is that we don't have the data. And that is really, really important. So it's part of my job to do that. So I'm going to present. All right, so my presentation is very colorful because Rubadiri, I got a headache after yours. I feel a little bit depressed, but I think it's hopeful, right? And the reason why I was asked to do this by CARICOM is simply because I think because of the work that I've done with Anime Caribe, I've built up a cadre of regional artists, visual artists, audio and visual artists. So they asked me to do that presentation about 2 months ago. So I wanted to share this image before I move on, because this is based on what happened in Germany, actually, at one point with COVID, right? 100% performing arts was down, right? Which is, it's a sad thing, but I think that is reflected here in Trinidad. As far as film, 98% of film was affected and music 62. Now, I find that very interesting because it also reflects what's going on here. Now, in Germany, although that happened, a $50 billion aid package. Now, we are not Germany, so I'm not pretending that, we could do the same. But the COVID happened, there was that breakdown, but the government invested 50 billion aid package to the creative sector. And the words from the culture minister then was, artists are not only indispensable, but also vital, especially now. I mean, that's the minister that said that. So I want to give quickly some overviews of the different sectors, the different elements of the sectors that came to me from, so for instance, for music, while many industries shrink, home entertainment saw a boost in consumption overall, right? So we had to be entertained at home, or else we would die. I know everybody here felt that. All right, so it said that there was an increase in TikTok videos. It just went off the charts, games, animation, music, right? People were creating their own content. So therefore, even influencers, that increased, YouTube channels, that increased. And it also changed the paradigm when it comes to who owns content and what content means now. And I know we talked about the Zessa movement. That is something in itself that we could see that was impacted because of the fact that YouTube and online views are what makes the money for these entertainers. So there were some downsides, there were some good sides, there were some bad sides. For this presentation, I did consultation with Film TT Animation Networks in Trinidad, Jamaica, Suriname, Guyana, filmmakers and audio specialists from Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Antigua, Belize, St. Lucia. So this is giving you a very sort of regional perspective. So with COVID-19, of course, these things happen, the social distancing, the lockdowns impacted productions. Productions shut down in Trinidad and all over the world. Of course, every carnival was postponed or canceled. Jamaica, Barbados, Crop Over, Grenada, you name it, canceled. So we all know that, all right? The impact on the audio visual economy in the Caribbean, this is from data that was given to me, was of course live performance festivals were affected mostly. No live performances, no tours. Artists were doing virtual concerts, but no revenue intake. So not many artists tried, and we know that Patrice tried, Voice tried, and recently Kes tried. All right, but the revenue intake is the challenge. Of course, smaller artists were mostly affected throughout the Caribbean. There was no legal regional representation at all on Who Global Concert a few weeks ago, not even Jamaica, but this would have been a few months ago, right? Not even Jamaica. So we had no presence there. Why did we not have presence there? All right. Of course, film production shut down. There were some positives, like Rubadiri says. So the animation and game sector is flourishing in COVID. It is actually flourishing because of the fact that these the animators can work from home. That's a big thing. All right. So Full Circle Studio in Trinidad and Tobago and Coded Art in Trinidad and Tobago currently doing work and bringing in foreign exchange and doing international work. However, the investment is not there for them to ramp up. Instead of having 10 people doing work, they could have 100 people doing work, but the investment is not there to ramp up, right? The creative ideas are flowing, of course, during lockdown, and creatives are using this time to do a lot of online courses and to improve the skills. So those were some of the positives. The challenges that I got back from the few Caribbean islands was, of course, the immediate challenge. The immediate challenge was getting work, right? Most producers don't have resources to weather the COVID, and many are already carrying debt, and we could see it. We talked about it earlier. Because of limited Caribbean outlets that can monetize online content, creatives are stuck in a be content relationship with audiences and brands. So I would pay hundreds of dollars to go be in a jazz performance, to see Vonette. And I was seeing Vonette free on Facebook. It pained. All right, almost all potential projects have been cancelled or put on hold. With the future uncertain, the only relief was in the form of a loan. Now, this is regional. I need to keep saying this is not Trinidad and Tobago. So Trinidad and Tobago government has offered some funded for freelance creatives, and it's still being implemented. This was before the budget. All right, so COVID-free for over 30 days, Belize, only mainland country in the Americas with 0 cases. That is no longer so. Brazil and Mexico can affect their status if the borders are open, and that's exactly what happened. So they had 0 cases, but because of what happened in Brazil and what happened in Mexico, that changed. So even those on the mainland were affected. So though the online learning has increased, the professional courses are not cheap online. So that's also a challenge. Some Caribbean filmmakers have had to pause for travel for work as actors and artists from different countries, right? So that was in particular Antigua. Those who do audiovisual training as another income earner state that the requirements for physical distancing has made it impossible. So COVID affects the ability to raise funds for projects because business will not be confident that the project will happen. And of course, at the time, planning the film festival for Carifesta has halted. Well, as you all will know, Carifesta has been absolutely shut down. So it's not going to happen in next year. So Carifesta, which is a big platform that really, really was one of the platforms where not only in the Caribbean island, but that hosting it, but in the other Caribbean islands, that's where we show our films and show our animation and play our music, absolutely pulled from under us. So the challenges, I also took a sort of formal approach to some of the challenges. So I asked Film TT for some of their challenges, and they felt that the need for regional film legislation, co-production treaties needed to happen, especially because of this increase of industry standard professionals that need to support the industry. And of course, limited and adequate stakeholder access to multiple finance sources, banks, etc. Those were some of the challenges. So I quickly want to move on to recommendations. Again, this is not from me, this is from the region. This time would require retooling and call for investment in new tech. A tax holiday for 5 years for creative enterprise to allow for restructuring. I believe this came from Barbados. Removal of duties and taxes on new equipment for production companies. This can be for 2 years. Additional incentives can come in the way for grants, subsidies, organizations to support their membership, much like funds allocated to churches, etc. I believe this came from Antigua. Access to professional international courses that can help us to at least develop our skills at this time. Make available grants or initiatives for development of animation and game content. Now, this is very important because you all have to understand that there's a huge value chain to animation. So I know, Ruby, you spoke about that we have to incorporate. That is not even, you don't even need to say that. We need voice actors, we need music, we need designers, we need artists, we need script writers, we need, I mean, the value chain is enormous, all right? Filmmakers, animators, musicians should receive funding to support project development without long delays to get the funding. Individuals who work in the creative industries full-time should register and contribute to a regional fund that can be a source of financial relief now. Barbados is given one-time checks to creatives that contribute to the NIS. This is a good model, right? This came from Barbados. Of course, recommendation creatives should get the equivalent of unemployment once they have been contributing. The work of creators should be seen as essential, much like media workers. Antigua said that. Encourage the development, optioning, and selling of idea scripts for the purpose of creating short-form content for digital platforms. Creation of new intellectual properties in animation, film, and music, as it is the safest way to create. So with animation, if you notice now, those who are into music, a lot of the videos for music now are animated. Content quota, of course, we spoke about that. Improvement of doing business between the islands, supporting channels for collaboration. I cannot tell you how much channels we have, right? So again, this will also support institutions like Gael, supporting remote work in cultural arts sector. This can be this can be through grant allowances or subsidies for internet costs, online server access, online training, computer hardware, software. Education reform is needed, absolutely. This is my thing. This is my sore spot for 21st century learning. Lamar will share my feelings about that. In order for us to really be out there, we have to have that reform, and we have to have that reform happen really, really quick. So Rubadiri, for instance, you said that, you know, there are 2 phases, and in order to go to the 3rd phase, we need to do those 2 phases. I'm telling you, Rubadiri, we had to leapfrog that thing. I'm sorry, we have to leapfrog, because if we do not do that with technology, oh my God, we will die. Okay, so there's certain things that we have to jump over, forget that, and move on. All right, so education is important. The sector cannot be understood without the crucial role of IP rights. That's a big thing. We talked about Korea, that was brought up. That is a huge thing. Parasite is not a mistake. That film that won the Academy Award, that is not a mistake. That was Korea investing billions of dollars in their creative sector. The K-pop phenomena is not a mistake. That is investment from the government. When they realized that the young people were singing pop, they were like, okay, we can't get them to stop singing pop. We will invest in the pop. Do you hear there's a thing going on right there? So Film TT made some recommendations. They said contact tracing questionnaire for international productions. This is to be added to all film facilitation. So this is something that they're working on. Productions implement mandatory basic PPE, virtual location scouting, so that we can keep that going. All right, so opportunities. I want to end with opportunities. As you can see, it's nice and bright and pink because I'm a happy person and I don't want to leave here depressed. Okay, so great opportunity for animation, game, and recorded music sector. That is without a doubt. It is thriving, right? We can now produce training videos for distribution online. That also is a bit something that could sustain that could sustain the creative sector on all fronts, not just film and animation, music, you name it. Caribbean films on digital platforms like Studio and Nancy TV, Netflix, Amazon Prime have gotten more views during the pandemic. So they're actually Caribbean content that got those views. Hence an increase in income from that area from some Caribbean filmmakers. We can focus on writing the scripts for dramas, animated series, documentaries, so that when we can get back to work as soon as we can. So therefore, don't wait for this to end. Invest in script, invest in training. Opportunity exists online markets, and being able to monetize the same. This is huge. This is something that we could do immediately. Digital consumption is at an all-time high. How can we harness the free intellectual property into packaged products? So Rubadiri, you touched on that. And the last few years, there's a growing demand for stay-in-house services, such as online stream services. We could take advantage of that. The demand can be beneficial for testing new formats where in sub-markets where they are absent. I just have to say the word carnival and you all will know exactly what I'm talking about. However, this is not enough time for us to do carnival virtually the way we should do it for next year, because I'm telling you what is needed to be done. If we are to do it, it needs to start yesterday, and we are not even at that point. So the example of South Korea shows that more far-reaching possibilities, drives through libraries, virtual museums, they're doing it, all right? And I will say, Rubadiri, to the idea of the building, let us take that building. Let us take that building and make it what it is, right? The crisis can also be an opportunity for new developments in the field of digital tech. We know that, right? Financial support and project funding can be used for testing, such as developments and visions, enabling new sources of revenue for the sector in the long run. And I want to leave with two last things. So when on the 20th of the 4th, 2020 at 7:45 p.m., when I heard that the oil barrel was US $0.11 US to a barrel, I went online and I said, let me check out Netflix stocks. $434 US, $437.49 US. So I took a picture of that and I put the date, all right? The 20th of the 4th month, 2020, Netflix stocks were $437. For me, as a practitioner, as the founder of one of the Caribbean's leading animation festival that was listed as top 10 festivals in the world. Trinidad doesn't know that. Anime Carib Festival was listed as one of the top animation festivals. All right. This year, we raised 15% of the budget needed for the festival at a time when we should be on the platform telling the world we are opening up a Tamana outsourcing hub. We have over 200 students trained up in UTT. We raised 15% of the budget. Now, I want to tell you all how we're fixing that. And it's absolutely by collaboration and trade. We're going back all the way to trading services. So at the moment, Titan, which is Trinidad and Tobago Animation Network, Jamaica Animation Network, Suriname, Guyana Animation Network, some of local agencies, we are literally trading services. In order for the festival to happen, we are trading services. That is where we reach. So with that in mind, I would like to say thank you, and I cannot wait to hear the conversation as we take this forward.
Thank you so much, Camille. I am with you. The glass is always half full, right? So you started off with some statistics from Germany and a very supportive quote from their minister, really fostering that spirit of camaraderie among creators in Germany. You touched on the effects of COVID, as we know, everything being canceled. And then you went regionally with the positive, the negative, and the challenges facing the audio-visual economy. You also looked at the film TT, what their challenges are, what their recommendations are. Also some recommendations from around the Caribbean, most notably Barbados and Antigua, having some very good best practices that Trinidad could learn from. And, you know, some common themes resonating throughout the three presentations: education, training, having a vision, collaboration, and just going gung-ho. And you ended on a high with the opportunities for animation, for example, online distribution, and just turning things around for the good of the industry, for the sector. And an eye-opener, the price of the stock price for oil versus the stock price of Netflix, which puts things into perspective, where we need to go, how we to diversify. Yeah. So should we move on to the questions?
Sure.
Yeah. All right. First, we have from Nishkal George. What does the arts community have to say about the sidelining of the hospitality or tourism industry? What does the arts community have to say about the sidelining of the hospitality/tourism industry? Thank you for your question, Michelle.
If I may.
Well, I mean, so what is inside the budget for tourism? There's a set of money that's there for a lot of what I would call like the kind of cliche tourist destinations, the Maracas and those things, and in terms of ramping up their things as destinations. There's money for the tech inside of there. There's heritage-based monies which can be used again for kind of the cliche heritage kind of sites to ramp those up to like as tourist destinations and those kinds of things. The thing that is not present is, again, a kind of seizing of what this moment means for the tourist sector in terms of the necessity of the virtualization of content, the urgency of that, the urgency of creating destinations and using the downtime to ramp up Trinidad and Tobago's destination stock, and also to go after brand TNT in the interim internationally. So to use this time to go after foregrounding your brand, so that when things open back up, you have a place in the firmament. And so in a lot of the things in the budget, there's not that kind of strategy, industrial strategy that that sees beyond crisis and doesn't see opportunity of the moment, and how to tool and retool industry for this moment, to platform to the next level for what happens next. And the big thing would be the hotel school, that the allowing of the hotel school to collapse in Trinidad, even though the one in Tobago is still operating, and so people have moved across and that kind of stuff. It was a private, concern and that kind of stuff, you know. But something that is so integral to the stock of talent that has been produced. I mean, so many award winners from that hotel school in terms of chefs, in terms of hospitality things in international competitions and that kind of stuff, like regular international winners, you know, coming out of that facility. You know, that it could be allowed to collapse, you know, without any kind of fanfare or even a plan to say, okay, well, let's see if we could run it at half capacity, or, you know, or what, and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think those are the things, and those are crisis of vision, which is like the larger crisis, and that kind of stuff, which is not understanding the moment and understanding the opportunities that are present in this moment of crisis.
Lamar, you wanted to chime in as well?
Well, firstly, I agree with most of what everybody said. I feel as though that I do really understand the question of sidelining. Again, we need to always look at issues of expenditure within the context of the broader picture. And we are having a discussion about the creative industries, almost in isolation of the other major factors that are affecting the nation. Obviously, the fight against COVID has demanded a certain exorbitant amount of resources that we need to focus there, which is, again, also reflected in how creative sector has received money, because the creative sector has historically been misunderstood. And even if you look as far back as one of the first academics to really talk about the cultural industries and creative sector, J.D. Elder, who really wrote about it and researched it very extensively, he already identified in the 60s, before the exploitation of, you know, our energy or oil resources and gas resources in 1972, that we didn't understand anything about culture. The people who were really overseeing it were technocrats within government who had no understanding or no training. It was just that Dr. Williams, in his vision to decolonize the country, identified that, hey, here we're going on. These areas are important, whether it's Best Village or the Trinity of Carnival art forms. These things are important. We need to mobilize these people. I would go a bit further right to say that you know, persons like Satmaraj and others identify these as this the Afro, I don't know if there's a word, but Afrocentrification of the culture of Trinidad, where we identify these things as important, right? And the thing about it is, just coming back to the whole idea of tourism being sidelined, you know, I don't think that's the issue. It's not an issue of tourism being sidelined. There's just been this historical misunderstanding of how to diversify the economic portfolio because of Dutch disease, which is discovery of major resources and exploitation of major resources without an understanding of how to really look long term, look longitudinally at how we exploit those resources. And that's something that we see in the creative sector too. We're having a discussion about now, and the creative sector plan needs to be longitudinal. And luckily, folks like Rubedaria and Camille have, you know, been in the game, you know, when I was in primary school or a little boy, not to make them feel that age. But no, on a
I'm
serious
younger
note,
than you, Bibo. People are younger than
exactly. You're younger than me. We are mine older. But no, but they have paved a way, you know, and I said it before, you know, Camille as the godmother, you know, and when I say godmother, I mean in the Italian way, like always godmother of animation in the Caribbean. I will go as far as to say that, and Camille could tell me if I'm wrong. And she has done so much for animation and for Trinidad and for the Caribbean and animation, and she doesn't get the commensurate resources she thinks she needs, you know. So just to go back to the whole idea of tourism being silent, it's not so much that tourism being silent, it's just the government doesn't understand what to do, how to diversify the portfolio. And this is one of the contradictions I have, or one of the points that kind of a bit contrary to what Ruben was saying, is that even though we see now as a pivotal moment in history, where hey, this is the moment that we could use to pivot to creative sector and whatnot, you have to understand that we have to understand that the public sector, well, the politics of the public purse is an intractable kind of situation. It's a problem you can't solve and figure out how to solve it, because the average politician, their vision is only 5 years long. They could only see 5 years long. And the average artist or stakeholder could only see by the end of today. I know I have to pay bills by the end of today, I have to pay staff. We could only see so far. But the problem that we need to solve is a generational problem, where we need to go back and look what stupidness we do before, what didn't work and what worked, and how do we fix that, and how do we move forward. So, you know, the whole idea of merging the tourism and culture portfolios is almost a given. It's like, okay, we're not going to give money to either of them, put them together, and we get them. It's like you have two children, and the parents say, hey, I can't take care of them children, send them by the mother to them, or send them by some parent to see about them. And they put these two portfolios together with a reduced budget, a reduced global budget and individual budget, to figure out how to share resources. You know, so we're in a dire position. So it's not so much that tourism has been sidelined, it's more an issue of the government has their own opinions historically of what are the sectors that need salvaging. And the last thing I'll say before I end what I'm my comment is that as I was telling a student and a colleague, when you look at bailouts internationally, when they bail out billion-dollar companies, whether it's ExxonMobil or Virgin Air or whoever, whichever airline or whatever, one of the major economic principles of bailouts is that the people that you're bailing out have major assets and physical infrastructure. You don't bail out somebody who just only have intellectual property. You're not going to say Michael Jackson, well, if he was alive, we're going to bail you out because you're not going to be able to create music. He have no infrastructure or no intellectual property. Yes, he hires people. It's not intellectual property, sorry. He has no physical infrastructure. He hires a large staff, yes, but he has no physical infrastructure. And infrastructure was bailed out. That's why when you look at what happened with tourism in Trinidad, who was the first people to get for the government to speak about? It was Tobago, where they say, all right, we're going to give 15 million, how much of it was, to the Tobago tourism sector, because they were speaking specifically about people with physical assets, hotels, etc. It wasn't even the staff they were considering. It is the hotels, and this is not something specific to Trinidad. If you look at any bailout, there's always physical infrastructure as a part of it. And if you read Jerome Mooney or any of these other tourism economists, they explain how important infrastructure is. And the creative sector does, because of again, the large part of the informality side of it, does not identify these things. So I know I diverge a little bit from the point, but I don't feel like the tourism sector was sidelined as well.
I just should also say the government has just completed a major consultative exercise on creating a cultural tourism policy, a new tourism policy where stakeholders fed a lot into, where hopefully some of the innovations and stuff that we're talking about towards diversification should be taken on in this new so they are actually in a transitory stage. So they're at a point of transition where this new policy, which is supposed to be unveiled sometime in the next 2 months or so, will be unveiled, and then you have an idea of the direction that the entire sector will take.
Thank you, guys. Next question from Gabrielle. How do the vulnerable sectors within the creative industries lobby for improved legislation? How do they go about it?
So what would you deem the vulnerable in particular? Go ahead, Lamar. Let me hear, because
Well, I'm just trying to take front in front of everybody because I'm gonna unload. Gonna unload on me. But what I would say as it pertains to vulnerable sectors, as I had identified earlier in my presentation, the creative sectors, the creative industries is a very diverse set of subsectoral or niche markets, right? So, we're going from architecture to toy making. There's a diverse population of stakeholders. So, as it pertains, just sorry, repeat the question to me, was
How do the vulnerable sectors within the creative industries, how do they go about lobbying for improved legislation?
right, and this was one of the points that I had kind of raised. One of the major areas within policy creation is identifying a network. If you do policy studies, they kind of point to identifying network. And what we have seen in Trinidad, I have a folder with policy documents from when my father was a little boy, and what we have seen is very little implementation. The implementation we see is when a policy becomes statutorily enshrined in the overarching infrastructure framework of policy documents for the country. So, for example, and I keep citing it, the NCC Act is a policy document that is in stone, right? So, if we're talking about vulnerable sectors, we're talking about music, we're talking about anything performance related. These areas vulnerable. Animation, as Camille talked about, gaming. These sectors a bit more. They transcend the limitation of physical interaction. So somebody could be, Kaifas Moore, one of the faculty members at UTT. He could be home programming something. He could program a little sequence of a video game for somebody to play or at least contribute to the process remotely via technology. However, a dancer now has to figure out, or they are a bit more vulnerable than, again, gaming or even architecture, where they're doing drawings to send to somebody to build. And the thing about it is, for even when it's vulnerable or powerful groups within the overarching industrial sector, the major thing to note, again, at least based on policy theory and political science, is network establishing network. So if it is just for the sake of argument, if we identify music, dance, fashion, for example, as the vulnerable industries, it's important that they find a place in the overall network. Who are the network of creative industries? What are their resources? What are their beliefs? Because beliefs also play a part in the whole thing. And as it pertains to policy creation, to ensure that they are represented in the budget or in any governmental initiatives, they need to ensure that what their needs are statutorily documented. So the reason why, again, Trinidad, TUCO, and the NCBA and TCCBA have received money is because they have been statutorily documented. Even if you look at some of these state enterprises, statutory documentation more important than a policy exercise. So cultural policy, there have been in excess of 10 incarnations of cultural policies created. Ruben has been part of several and also authored at least one that I know of, because I saw his name on it with Bruce Paddington and some another gentleman. None of those documents came into force, at least as far as I know. Elements possibly, but these documents are internal documents that never make it to cabinet, or if they make it to cabinet, they don't come into force by statutory force. So my suggestion would be for any of these vulnerable groups to first identify allies, build up a coalition. Formalization of your sector is important, and then obviously ensuring that your policy needs are statutorily represented, as opposed to some token gesture of, we're doing a policy exercise, everybody come and meet by Napa and we'll have cake and cheese paste sandwiches and juice that we get or chubbies. We buy some little chubbies and everybody come and we talk nice and it goes nowhere. right? So that's
I would like to add something that is slightly different to Lamar's take, right? And I think because I've been on both sides of the fence, I've been the chair of Film TT, so I understand how that works. I've been a practitioner, so I understand how that works. So I'm able to actually see the reality for what it is. Now, I believe that our approach as especially the vulnerable need to take on a different approach, because for me the structure within our government, within our state, within those sort of institutions does not allow for us to really have an authentic say. I'm telling you, I've sat in meetings with ministers for years and years, right? Discuss policy, discuss what is needed. Everybody, you've been in there with us, right? And it has not worked for our sector. It has not. Not so far, it has not. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't, because I am a believer in lobbying, right? But what I'm saying, we must have a plan A and a plan B. And one of the ways, and someone said to me, we need the elites who are in the institutions, and I don't like the word elites, but that is the word that was used. We need elites who are in these institutions and who are the champions to do the lobbying for us, because that kind of works better. So the vulnerable, yes, we have the voices and we need to get that across. But if you don't have that middle person in there to take that message, I am telling you, I've been in situations where we came up with the policy, we break it down into, and from the time you meet a certain point within those institutions, one person have a say. And that is our reality. It is our reality. So we have to find radical ways. And I could tell you, I am like that. That is how I work. I am, if you want to call me an elite, you could. I don't see that, but that was the term that was used. That is sitting within the institution that have the knowledge and the power to put down certain things that allow something like the hub to not just feed into students at UTT and in Tamina, but to support small and micro enterprise. If you don't have someone like myself making sure that those things are met, then you will have the bureaucrats and the technocrats not seeing that this is important. So there needs to be a radical way to impact, not just on policy, and policy is important, of course.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Before we continue, is it okay if we go a little beyond the time, like an extra 20 minutes, just to field more questions? That's okay.
No problem.
Okay, great. Rubideri? Mm-hmm.
Right. So the thing is that she's asking legislation. I would say let's look at interventions at legislation and policy that could be made to impact the vulnerable. In the things that we submitted to government, there were two main things that we had, which was, we said, these are free things that only require the stroke of a pen that could release huge amounts of economic capacity into the sector. One was local content quotas. So by creating local content, all of a sudden you say on radio and television, especially at these times, prime time, 8 to 11 o'clock on weekdays, children's Saturday mornings from 8 to 11 o'clock, times like that, on radio, drive time and those kind of things, you have to play 50% or 80% local content or whatever, and those kinds of things, right? 50% normally, 80% at prime time or those kinds of things. That immediately creates economic capacity for creators of content. So it means musicians, artists, owners of IP, owners of content and those kind of things immediately have monies coming to them simply because advertisers, corporate people, and stations need to fulfill those quotas. And those things create their own kinds of ecosystems. I always say Ian Allen took dead air from 6 to 7 p.m., monetized it where that air was creating $250,000 every evening. And everybody from 6 to 7 then started to be able to create competing things and made 6 to 7 o'clock a valuable time and that kind of stuff. Imagine that happening in multiple spaces and that kind of thing in the creation of content. So that local government, local content quotas creates those kinds of economies, which then impact downstream creators. The other one was the regularization of the land tenure of panyards. Now, 65 to 75% of panyards are on state lands. With the stroke of a pen, government could give deeds of title to 65 to 75% of the panyards that exist. It means that all of a sudden, panyards and stuff, of course, we, as part of this project that we had and we got the cabinet note, there were seminars to ramp up the managerial capacity of the bands, and there was an overarching trust company that would overlook how they manage those things. But it means this would be the greatest migration of wealth into the roots classes, the working class, and the creative sector in Trinidad and Tobago's history. You're talking literally hundreds of millions of dollars worth of wealth would immediately come into the pan sides and those kinds of things, because now they own land and they own land equipment and all those different kinds of things. So the thing is that, so there are things that could be done on a policy and on a legislative level, free of charge, with the stroke of a pen, that create new wealth and new value within the sector. The thing is that what though we are saying is that the projects that we have in projects that identify things for the vulnerable performing artists. So let's say theater people and dance people. The creation of the competition, the dance soloist competition and the actor monologue competition from primary, secondary, and adult, tertiary, and adult level, with corporate people feeding in for prize monies and stuff. So you're now creating an online voting American Idol kind of television online event, that at the center of which are people who in this time cannot perform in public and with social connection. And you are now creating a space where those people can, as coaches, online coaches, and as well as practitioners, have access to monies, prize monies, performance monies, and those kinds of things. And it ensures also that the curriculum is delivered for the theater and dance things for SCA and those other things. And so those are the things that we have been working on, as well as the other things from the July generation, which have to do with creating online products, virtual products, television products, film products, those kind of products, using theatrical scripts and using theatrical things and ramping those up into television and monetizable virtual products, using the July generation as a jumping off for those things to happen. And in that way, we get the sector employed and we get them as owners of content going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Next question. How close do you think that we as a government is to introducing the inclusion of coding, given technological advancements and the fact that all classes are online at the moment?
Okay, that's a very technical. So first of all, the problem is that, well, the challenge is that coding needs to start in primary school, and it's absolutely not there. So we have a big problem, right? And as I said this before somewhere, where coding is almost like the alphabet of what alphabet meant back then. That is what coding means now. And we cannot start that in secondary school. So when I talk about education reform, I am talking going that far back. Coding needs to be brought into the primary level, right? But when we think about that, the challenge we have is, are the teachers prepared and educated to teach the students coding? So there needs to be a whole revolution in teachers training. So I totally agree with this, the person who put the question forward. It is critical. It is needed for every single thing, especially now. But it's not on our radar. And at secondary school, it's too late. So we need to reverse.
And we can thank Carissa David for that question. Anything else you wanted to add? Or we can move on. We could move on.
Go on.
Yeah. How can the industry go forward without government intervention?
Wow. And I think that's such a real question, because for me, again, going back to all the things that we've tried, we got a certain amount of government support, yes, but really and truly, we are alive as a sector because of what we did, because of what we as artists did to survive. It was not because of any money coming from the government. So therefore, I understand about the policy, Rubidiri, and what you're talking about, but we have to be radical now. I'm sorry, I'm saying it loud and clear. We have to take this by the horn and run with it. So people like Errol Fabian should be supported by the sector right now to make it, because I'll tell you what, the content that Gael has right now, it runs in the millions and millions. All right? So we have to package that content. We have to, and I already reached out to Errol, because I find that as a sector, these are the kind of things we have to do. We have to collaborate, we have to trade, we have to barter, and we have to support. We have to be our, each other's keeper. So an institution like Gael should be supported, because he himself said when he got the support, you all have become investors in Gael. You have become, you've bought shares. What do you want us to do now? That's an open call. And I think those are the kind of radical things. And I don't want to keep using the word radical, but we really have to move away from the traditional, because things have changed so drastically. And especially with technology, it's exponential. I don't know if you understand what that means, but it means it's getting cheaper and it's moving quicker, which means that even a 4-year degree right now, when you finish it, if you don't upgrade, you obsolete one time. There isn't a job for you. That is how bad it is. There isn't a job for you. Right now, young people are jumping off degrees. They're like, why am I doing 4 years? And I could go and do these short courses, create a portfolio, and become an influencer or whatever. So we have that paradigm is shifting under our feet. And I think this is the point. That's a fabulous question. It is a point where we now have to create our own course as a creative sector.
Thank you, Rachel.
Well, I just say that the theme of my presentation was maroonage. It is about abandoning the plantation and abandoning government, that we have been abandoned. That budget has abandoned the sector. And so both things that we have created, the event horizons from the virtual carnival and the July generation, are based upon cooperative work within the sector. It means that we are working on creating feature films, premium television series product, gaming product, animation product, video games, and those kind of things by ourselves, for ourselves, for global platforms at streaming platform levels of HD content, and with all the hitting all the marks that they give us and that kind of stuff. We are operating with the best of the best equipment and talent and all of those things, bartering talent and creating those things. And we are doing it from now to July to create a generation of content that will be released July, August, September, every single week into global places and niche marketplaces. And that's what we're doing. And we have been talking and working on it. And in about 2 weeks' time, I think we should have some of the architecture of how we're going to go about doing that. And so the sector should, we will send out the flares in the sky to let the sector know that it's on. And that's what's happening. But we are doing it ourselves without government.
Thank you, Rubidiri. Next question from Rachel Briggs. Is there a plan that addresses piracy? How does the sector deal with piracy? Sorry.
Oh, piracy.
Piracy.
Well, just to touch on the current intellectual property laws and the issues with piracy. When was the last time you walk into Port of Spain and hear a pirate playing music and playing a CD? One might argue is because CD is no longer relevant, so you don't really see them as much in Port of Spain, you know. But the whole idea of piracy has, I think, kind of changed as it pertains to what is important again. And just to kind of go back to the previous question, to kind of touch there as well, as it pertains to government and whatnot. I think the thing that we need to accept is that we are trying to speak about a diverse group of subsectors, all with their specific problems, right? So architectural piracy is not as important a point as it is for music, right? Or dance piracy, somebody copying somebody's choreography, even though that does happen. So, you know, talking about piracy, we're speaking specifically about one industry or two, music and film, right? If we're speaking about piracy, film is still a heavy problem, but the films that we produce locally, I'm willing to wager that the directors or the producers of those films wish they were widely pirated, because it would show that there's a large degree of interest in the product. All piracy as an externality indicates is that a product is very popular and we're not willing to purchase it from the original owner. We're willing to pay less for it from people in the community to get the same product. And that's all piracy is, really, right? Even whether it's music or film. And the issue of piracy is obviously an important one as it pertains to intellectual property, but I feel as though the piracy legislation needs to be simplified, and I think there's something everybody really spoke about. And Camille may have mentioned it in a different way as well too, where the whole idea of bureaucratic documentation and processing of issues needs to be simplified. I shouldn't have, if it is I have an album of music, the amount of the number of charges, if it is somebody pirates my CD, the number of charges as it pertains to who are the not litigants but the victims of piracy, so extensive that no police officer or collective management agency wants to really address the pervasive issue of piracy within developing countries, as it would. Piracy is a huge issue in China. I could tell you there's a city in China, in Guangzhou, where you could just go and there's a space larger than the savannah, because my uncle and some other family members went it. Larger than the savannah, where you could get anything. You could get a pirate PlayStation, an iPhone, you could get music, you could get anything pirate. Anything that is a popular commodity, you could get pirated now. And it, to my estimation, it doesn't really affect the distributors of the product, because China not buying the product from them anyway. That kind of way?
I'd like to add to what Lamar's saying, the Nigerian model when it comes to film. They've sort of institutionalized piracy, right? So in the few years ago when it first started, it was a problem, right? There was that disconnect. And what happened was the pirates and the filmmakers started working together. All right. So they have, and this is what I talk about revolutionizing culture. This is what we need to do. We need to radicalize our approach. There's a huge a fight right now between Apple and the gaming industry, because normally the games have to go through a particular network using Apple and whatever. Now they're like, why do we need that? Why do we need that? So they're now starting to sort of institutionalize their own piracy, because it means that it's not flowing through the traditional. And that's all piracy is, really. It's not flowing through the traditional, which is normally big business. And that is why piracy actually can work for culture. I seriously believe that. But it just means you take away what piracy normally you think in your head what it is. Right? Because for Nigeria, it worked. Nigeria film now, we have a whole section on Netflix with Nigerian films.
Black diaspora music would never have mainstreamed in the Western world if it was not for piracy. We wouldn't even have known our Jamaican music existed if it wasn't for, if we were depending on mainstream radio stations and that kind of stuff. So the thing is that a lot of the underground stuff that is now like the hot stuff in the planet, right? Which is mostly in music, is black diasporic music and that kind of stuff. Use the pirate underground to gain space. When there was issues with pirates in the early 90s when COT first came about and stuff, we took the radical position that we should have been working with the pirates. And because the pirates had distribution channels that none of us had, and they had the ability to reproduce the material because they had industrial infrastructure, factories, and that kind of stuff, mass production and those kinds of things. They were mass producing music and TV at a rate and a possibility that we couldn't. And they were getting stuff in all the major metropolitan countries on the planet. So that we would have had something coming out now, and it's in Brooklyn, it's in London, it's it's all over the place and that kind of stuff. Now, the reason why we said that we needed to partner with them is because with the business model as it was, the artists weren't getting paid, right? The pirates and stuff were getting all the money, and we were saying that, hey, what? And this meant that it would require one kind of conversation on the top level, meaning that all of us as industry practitioners say, well, yes, we are supporting COT and the international treaties and whatever. But on the other level is that us, the police, everybody sitting down with the pirates and saying, okay, here what? We have this material coming out now and that kind of stuff. We want it on the streets and those kind of stuff. Your cut is 60%, our cut is 40%, or vice versa, or whatever, and that kind of stuff. And that was how it should have been used during that period. And part of the reason that Trinidad and Tobago's music did not spread in the way that Jamaican music did, and a lot of the things and that kind of stuff had to do with the way that we policed piracy at that time, in a crucial period in the 90s and those kinds of things in the early 2000s. Now, piracy is different because the amount of monies that people get from physical reproduction of their work is small. It's a very small subset of people are still producing CDs for mass production, that kind of stuff, and it's a real cottage thing, right? Nobody's trying to get a mass part of their income from that, even though that for cottage people, that still is something that they do. I mean, if I was to do something now and put out something, I would say I would press 200 CDs and try to get 200 CDs sold, and that will give me 200 by $40 or whatever it is, But yen printing 10,000. The thing is that the amount of money that you get from physical reproduction is now small because most of your distribution has moved online onto streaming content things, onto YouTube and onto those kinds of things, and that is because the new model is towards performance, so that you are releasing things for free or not near free to be able to buy yourself cachet to be able to perform. Of course, now that is flipped because performance is zero income, and so that is the pressure on performing artists, that there's a double whammy where there's no monetizable product and there's no monetizable performance. And that is the issue. Now for film, the piracy, we had the issue of Welcome to Warlock, where that thing sold like thousands and thousands and thousands of DVDs, right? It even spawned an industry of young urban filmmakers. He received nothing from that because we kind of dropped the ball in terms of establishing that connection between, and that in the film industry, I think that it's still a valid thing because DVDs still has currency. That is still a way of spreading content. It's not so much for music, but with film, I think that is a model that we can still utilize. And in fact, the urban filmmakers in Trinidad, that's how they are being capitalizing their business. They are selling DVDs. and that kind of stuff of their product, and that's how they make money to sell, to make the next movie and those kinds of things. So I think on that, you know, on a case-to-case, industry-to-industry basis, piracy has a different charge. But I would say the thing is to use the informal networks created by those clever entrepreneurs on the ground to be able to breach fortress economies, which you normally would not be able to get your product into. And that's how, especially Black culture, has mainstreamed itself in a racist, white, mainstream world. And it is the way that we have to use for certain sets of our products and stuff to be able to position them in places where they're supposed to be.
So true, Riverdairy. The questions come in, but we can't be here all night. So thank you to the viewers for your questions. Thank you for your enthusiasm, but we need to wrap. We need to wrap it up.
Take two more now, and let.
You want two more?
Lamar and
Camila
and them.
Hear that? All right, two more. Which one was I looking at? All right. Each year, the response to the budget is the same. What is the sector's plan B if its needs continue to not be met by the state? Thank you, Nicoya Lawrence.
We are no longer taking on government and the budget. The budget is immaterial to us and the plans going forward. We are moving into cooperative mode as a sector, bartering talent to create premium products for premium virtual platforms. That's what we're doing right now. We are banding together to create that content in animation, gaming, film, television, and music. And by July, we would have literally hundreds and hundreds of product ready for global marketplaces. And we are going to take the show on the road globally. And we're forgetting government. We will use the victories that we have won and the little things that we've won, the content, local content, and all the tax incentives and all those things. We will use every single of those things. But we are not depending on them for 1 cent or one thing going forward. We have to do it ourselves. And that's the model.
So I would like to add, and I guess this is my last statement. I am an optimist, right? So I believe that we will make things work out. But one of the things we have to do is what Rubadiri is saying, really do it on our own. But I would like to say here that there are valid institutions that could support what we're doing. So for instance, in my situation, the University of Trinidad and Tobago is a valid platform. There are challenges, the funding is not there, but the hub that is that is going to support the animation industry is a real thing. So not everything government is negative or that we don't want to use. So I would like to end by saying, let us utilize those institutions that are really there for a purpose. Professor Ken Julian created that concept based on the fact that there was a certain set of people in society that were not being given the platform to take their education on a certain level, and also to look at certain sectors that are not being looked at in other universities. That is what this was built for. We have an Academy of the Performing Arts, and Lamar is part of that. Lamar could tell you we have stars coming out of that. We have a fashion academy. We have stars. Someone who just did the hair for Missy. What's her name? Beyonce, right? So we have stars coming out of the university. And of course, I would like to end by saying that this hub that everybody is talking about, could be and it will be the center for creativity and technology for the creative sector. Let us use it in a positive way. I am there to create the less bureaucracy. As Lamar knows, we have certain bureaucracy we have to deal with. But once we're transparent and the powers that we understand what we're doing, we get things done. So I'm hopeful that this thing will work.
Thank you, Camille. And finally, the salary grant was extended to December for the creative sector. If nothing changes, what will be the next step or solution in the shortest possible time?
Just to jump in quickly, there's no solution. There's the situation, economic situations are not one with solutions. We have trade-offs, just to quote Thomas Sowell. There's no solution to serve everybody because, again, the amount of diversity in the sector. The government's commitment to fulfill or to provide grants for members of the creative sector until the end of the calendar year is admirable and accepted and welcomed. However, as it pertains to the next step for the sector, and this kind of dovetails from the previous question, the social contract between citizens and governments in different territories, garners different responses and sets up different situations based on the economic and historical circumstances of those countries. And we in Trinidad have developed a philosophy of governmental oversight that positions the government in the society's mind as the parent of the country, where they have to give us allowance, and if they don't give allowance, we throw a tantrum. And this approach to the relationship between private sector, public sector, community, society, and the government is not only flawed, is a real misunderstanding of the historical circumstances of economies in general, because there are no egalitarian societies where everybody's get what they want and everybody happy and like what they want and whatnot, So the thing about it is, as I had shared in my presentation earlier, there's, my big thing is that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. The first is we will at some point have to talk about policy creation, and we don't do that without identifying who the network is. The second mistake is that we don't set up a policy without thinking about what is the underlying theory governing the policy. Because what I am very familiar with is, artists, the creative sector romanticizing their work. Somebody say, well, I'm an artist and I deserve to be paid and I deserve to get money. And the government has to say about me and put things in place for me to survive. And we romanticize again or overemphasize to ourselves our position, And the last point is, again, looking at state-driven institutionalization. Even though in some instances, as Camille pointed out, using UTT and Professor Julian, for example, there have been major benefits from institutionalization, well, at least at the very least of education. So as it pertains to the next steps, beyond the grants, which is just, again, a little dust. There's a little dust, you can buy doubles and pay rent and whatnot, but it's not operational funds for you to run your business. We shouldn't even expect that. And again, it goes back to the whole idea of developing our network, developing the knowledge base and filling the gaps. There's a gap in the network where we do have a class of persons who dare to exploit the intellectual property of the wider creative sector. There's no class of people doing that. They have a few companies, but in international industries, there's a class of entrepreneur or corporate citizen whose job is to exploit. And when I say exploit, I don't mean take advantage of. I mean monetize the intellectual property of the creative sector. And the last point I'll make to this question, or to that question, is that the whole idea of a plan moving forward, as it pertains to economic projections, most economists are saying that by 2021, they're expecting global economies to rebound. We're talking about emerging economies, developed countries, and advanced economies, etc. Right? So we're talking about from the United States and the European countries all the way down to Botswana and African countries who are experiencing hardships right now. There's expectation to rebound because interest rates, among other things, going to drop and things going to become cheap when people go back out to work and there's a vaccine. The whole social distancing thing has suspended economic progression because of lockdowns, etc. And what we should be doing right now, we're in hibernation. I know we want to argue and say, hey, we need to do this next year. We need to get to work. We need to go on. We need to be working. The work we need to be doing is developmental, it's introspective. What is wrong with us? What is wrong with what we have set out, what we have established as it pertains to infrastructure, networks, etc.? How do we develop this? How do we develop our skills, our interpersonal skills, our again, the different range of cognitive skills that we need to have, etc.? I think that we should go into hibernation. That doesn't sound good for somebody whose lifeblood is the creative sector and making money. But a major part of what you do from this point onward is preparing to emerge from this cocoon of COVID.
Thank you, Lamar. So that's it, guys. Any final words for a wrap?
I have to walk on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. We just have, like what Amar said, but I think we just have to walk and chew gum at the same time. Whilst that ramping up of your internal and introspection and ramping up your capacities has to happen, we also need to be out there doing work at a time when the kind of possibilities in terms of the eyes that could be on us, in terms of the kind of content that we can create, season this moment, I think we could do magical things. And I think there's a whole generation of content that is bursting at the seams to happen, especially a lot of the young stuff. Like the under 30s, I didn't even say under 25s. There's a whole set of content that is waiting to happen and waiting for us to see. We have to empower ourselves in this period, barter our talents, collaborate, and get the best of the best out there. Bring the best of 5 generations to bear on every single one of those things and bring them out at optimum manifestation for global marketplaces. And whilst that is happening, we're doing the apprenticeships, we're doing the training, we're doing all the administration and ramping up of ourselves and our capacity. I think that that is what will make this period here really fertile and beautiful and magical.
Yeah, I would say collaboration is key for us, for our survival. This is how Anime Carib Festival is surviving. It's because we are trading services. Someone who could create the website, who could put things up there. I mean, it's really just a barter at the moment. So that is one way of survival, collaborating and supporting each other. And I do feel that it is, as much as it is a terrible thing, what I found, what COVID did for me as a festival director, it made me put my investment into people rather than toilets and conference halls and flights and hotel. This year, I put my whatever funding we got into people. And to me, that is what it should continue to be. Even if COVID leaves, let us look at funding people when it comes to the creative sector.
The one last thing I'll say is that, again, both Rubadiri and Camille covered very salient points as it pertains to, last words. The one thing I'll say is that we cannot frame our existence based on COVID. And I think that's what people do, and they're thinking like this thing is a never-ending nightmare. And it's not. And, we have to, there's a lot of sacrifice that needs to happen. But more importantly, we need to look generationally at what happens from the work we do now, which is something that we never do. We never think about, how do we make people's lives better? How do we make the creative sectors, the members of the stakeholders of the creative sector's lives better or easier down the road? And we always try to think of policies and ideas for now. How do I make my life better now? And again, if you just look at any major policy creation as it pertains to issues of serving needs, the people who always benefit are the future generations. There's nothing we're going to do that's going to make our lives way better than people who are going to come after us. And what we need to do is figure out what we would want to be at some point and really put things in place for that, as opposed to just saying that, well, I need to fix my life now. I'm a musician and my music not playing on the radio. But at the same time, a graphic designer and again work on, again, the problem's very different now, but similar in some ways. And we really need to think about generationally about what we do, because it will enrich what the process of fighting for it. Because what we're fighting for right now is survival, and we will survive. People will survive, But the thing about it is that we need to kind of lay a foundation, just like again Rubadiri and Camille, they are testament to what I'm talking about. The reason that I hear speaking about this is because I saw people like them, championing their causes, which is animation and Rubadiri, the wider creative and cultural sectors, And I decided, I like doing this. I read Generation Lion, and I said I like doing this, and I read about Camille in Vox magazine when I was young, and I said, I like this vibes, and I want to do this. And that's the kind of work that we need to do. We need to do inspirational work, because we're not just going to solve our problems overnight, by throwing a tantrum or, quoting figures to somebody. So, yeah.
Thank you, Rubadiri, Lamar, and Camille. We can only work from here, right? Opportunities, and we are optimistic. Thank you to our viewers again. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your enthusiasm, your participation. Thank you to the Alma Franco Institute for Research and Debate, Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. Thank you for having us. That's a wrap, guys. Oh, and season premiere, Amazing Race, shot in TNT at 9 p.m. on CBS. We got something to eat and all your prep for 9 p.m. and all your TV, in front of all your TV. All right, thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Have a good evening. Have a good night.
All right, guys.
All right.